Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to take another look at flow control, and specifically, we are going to take another look at if statements in the C programming language. This video is part of a larger series of videos that focuses on the fundamentals demo or the fundamentals of the C programming language, as well as part of a smaller series that focuses on the use and the syntax in different scenarios with the if statements. So this video assumes that you've already gotten a working project that you can run these demos in, and also that you have access to the snips files that you see on my screen in NetBeans. So the first thing that we want to do is go ahead and copy over the function prototypes and go ahead and add them into our ever-growing list of function prototypes, as well as the snip here, the function stub that I've provided. And you can simply put that then at the end of your fundamentals driver. All righty, so let's go ahead and take a look at this particular example, and let's see what is going to be different about it. So in an earlier video, we were talking a little bit about the temperature that you would get from the user. You'd ask the question what the current temperature was outside, and then from there, you could determine then what article of clothing that they should take with them. Now, I think we can all agree that's probably a very crude, very simple way of picking the article of clothing. And if anything, what we'd like to do is we'd like to improve on it a little bit, because sometimes you have to make that decision based on multiple criterion. And another way of looking at is there could be multiple conditions that you have to think about. Best example is whether it's raining or not. In other words, 80 degrees outside and raining is not the same as 40 degrees outside and raining. And hence, you might take a different article of clothing with you. What this will lead us to is the idea of nested if statements. And so you'll notice here that I effectively have the same syntax block that we saw in an earlier video. If anything, this is just simply the block that shows you how the condition is checked and then which block of code would run depending on which condition is true. In this particular case, we've got an if, else if with a second condition that we would then check, and then a block of code that would run if that second condition were true. And then the else block would run if none of the other conditions were true. The two important things to recognize is it's the first true condition that runs and only the first true condition that runs. In other words, you could technically have more than one condition be true. However, with an if else block or set of statements, you will only evaluate the first block of code under the first, you will only evaluate the block of code under the first true condition. Well, what are nested if statements? Well, if you notice, we can put any code inside of this code block. Well, why not go ahead and put another if statement inside of the first one? And what you're going to see is you can put any sort of code inside of any of these blocks. We're going to later on see when we start looking at loops that you can also have loops inside of if statements inside of loops, and so on and so on. The combinations are practically endless. What we want to do now is we want to use this to our advantage to determine what type of clothing we will be taking with us when we have two conditions to check. Now, I'm going to make a very broad statement here when it comes to nested loops. This is not going to be completely accurate, but if you have nested if statements, generally speaking, you can think of having nested conditions. And again, as a general rule of thumb, two conditions, two levels of if statements. Now, we're going to see in another video that there are actually some ways that you can do some conditional logic, combinatorial logic, where you can combine different conditions. In this particular case, we're going to keep it simple, and we're going to look at two things. We're going to check using an integer to see whether it is raining, And then what we're going to do is, just like in the earlier example, we are going to capture the temperature. And to give you a little bit of guidance about where we're going with this, we're going to actually have 4 possibilities here, because we're going to accept is raining will either be true or false. And then what we're going to do to keep this example simple, we're going to use the temperature equal to 70 degrees as our threshold. In other words, basically, everything below 70 is going to be considered cold. Everything above 70 is going to be considered warm. Now, are these particularly meaningful? Maybe not. They are kind of a little arbitrary. In other words, what is considered cold or warm is up to each individual. The idea here is that I now have 2 conditions that I need to prompt the user for, 2 questions I'm going to ask, and therefore then, depending on those 4 possibilities, we will determine then what type of clothing that they should take with us. And then, for completeness sake, based on what we've already seen or already done before, then what we're going to do is we're simply going to print this to the command line. So we're going to start off first by asking, is it raining? And what we're going to do is we're going to tell the user to put in either 0 for false or 1 for true. And you're going to see in just a second that is going to be a little problematic for us. We're going to follow that up with a scanf with a %d, and we're simply going to store at the variable is raining the value that we capture from the user. We're going to follow this up again with another print statement. What is the temperature? And again, with a scanf with another %d, address of the temperature variable. So what we'll do is we'll start by checking first the is raining condition. And we can do this by just simply checking to see if the value for is raining is equal to 0, which means that is raining is false, which brings us then to the else branch, that is raining is true. And I'll come back to this. I'm actually going to put some question marks here, because hopefully you can start to see the problem already. And if anything, what we're going to do is we're going to go now inside of the first block for our evaluation of is raining equal to 0 or false. And then we're going to follow this up with another if statement. And we're simply going to check to see if the temperature is less than 70 degrees. We're going to consider this cool, if not cold. And then follow this up with an else of where we're going to consider this warm or hot. And then what we'll need to do is we'll need to replicate this inner if statement every time, or for every else if condition that we have, to be able to handle all of our possibilities. Now, before we go any further, though, I'd like to think about the else branch and go back to this question that I sort of implied here, in that is raining equal to true? And the answer is, well, we don't actually know, because we didn't check to see what the value for is raining is equal, if it is equal to 1. Instead, what we did is we checked to see if it was equal to 0, and then we assumed that everything else was going to be true. In which case, because we cannot trust our user when entering integer values on the command line to limit their response to only 0s and 1s, what we need to do is we need to throw in an else if to check to see if is raining is equal to true, in which case now we can say is raining is true. And we can now use that nested if statement to check to see what the temperature is. We can follow this up with an else. And if we made it here, we have not only that is raining is true, but the temperature is less than 70. So it's cool, but it's also raining. And under the else, then it is warm and raining. So let's take a second to think about this. Then the only way that we could have gotten here is that it is cool and not raining. The only way we could have gotten to this point is if it's warm and not raining. Likewise, for this second branch of the outer if statement, the only way that we could have gotten to this block is if it was cool and raining. And the only way we could have gotten to this block is if it was warm and raining. Now, what we can do is we can go in and kind of fill in what we'd like here. In other words, whatever prompt we want to provide to the user. So we'll have a print statement here. So if it's cool and not raining, then perhaps please take a jacket, followed by a new line. If it's warm and not raining, then perhaps what we'll have here is a print statement. Please take some shorts. Again, probably not the best idea to have a C program determine what you wear on a daily basis. But if it's cool plus it's raining, print F, please take a trench coat. Followed by a new line. And then if it's warm plus raining, then perhaps please take an umbrella. Which brings us to the scenario down here where we know that it is not raining. And we know that it is also, or let me rephrase that, we don't know what the user intended. In other words, is raining is neither true nor false. In other words, is raining is unknown, in which case we'll simply follow this up with a print statement that says, please enter a 0 or a 1, followed by a new line. And we can also put a message in here that says printf error unhandled value. All right, so I seem to have a unhandled character here. Give me just a second. Not sure where the problem is. My print statements don't look clean for whatever reason. Let's see if I can figure out what's going wrong here. There we go. All right, so I was missing my new line. There we go. All right, so let's go ahead and build it. I've got one extra set of quotes that need to be gone. Let's try that one more time, build it. And now what we can do is we can simply run our fourth example here. Build it once again. Let's run this from the command line. And we can start off by trying to break it. It will technically accept any value. I'm going to put in -3 for is it raining? What is the temperature? 90. And it's going to say unhandled value. Let's try not to break it this time. We'll put in 0 for false. And the temperature is 80. Asks me to wear shorts. Is it raining? False. Temperature is 50. Please take a jacket. Is it raining? 1, which is true. What's the temperature? 80. Bring an umbrella. And then is it raining? And the temperature is 50. Please take a trench coat. And so you can see here that not only have we handled the 4 scenarios that we intended to handle, the jacket, shorts, trench coat, and umbrella, but we also built in with our nested logic the unhandled or unknown value that the user may accidentally enter in. Now, you can have any sort of combinations of this. You can have an if-else, else-if inside of a if-else, else-if statement. Doesn't really matter. In this particular example, we have an if-else nested inside of an if statement as well as an else-if branch. And it turns out that you can optionally drop one of the else branches. However, though, I will encourage you to always have an else branch, even if it only has a comment in it. And you can see again why this structure of having an else as a catch-all is very useful. So as always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and thank you for watching.